During the Hellenistic and Roman period of ancient Greek philosophy, it was a time when the Roman armies invaded the Greek city-states. Now, this building that you're looking at is one of the most important buildings of early Roman period. It is called the Pantheon, and I would like you to remember the greatest building of the Greek period, the Parthenon. Remember how the Greek building, the Parthenon, sat atop the hill, and it could be viewed from all angles, just like a good argument can be viewed from all angles, and the weight of the better argument carries the day. Well, this was the idea of Greek democracy, where their debate was important, dissension was important, discussion was important. When the Roman armies invaded the Greek city-states, this changed. In Rome, we had a centralized form of government, and just like this Pantheon is a centralized circular plan, and we'll look at the interior here, and the sort of governance was from the top down. It wasn't the democracy from the bottom up, so to speak, that the Greek city-states had. And as a result of the chaos of the invasions, the culture and the ethics that were usually relied upon passing from one generation to the next, those ties were severed. The bonds between the older generation and the younger generation were severed by the Roman armies, and new culture was introduced. A culture that aimed at efficiency and expediency of a republic. With that, we had a fragmenting of philosophy, and although it was important that questions of the good life be contemplated, and there were still thinkers who asked this question, how should we live? There were 4 different schools that resulted in the aftermath of the Roman invasions. We have the Cynics, who is most noted by Diogenes, the Stoics, noted by Chrysippus, the Epicureans, noted by Epicurus, and the Skeptics, noted by Carnetides. And we will discuss each of these schools of philosophy. After Aristotle and the invasions of the Roman armies, reality was unmoved by personal initiative. That is, the source of governance was Rome itself. Epicurus, who dates from 342 BCE, thought that all that mattered was pain and pleasure. Apart from clusters of atoms, nothing else existed. Now, he was Leucippus and Democritus' student, so of course he is a materialist. The chief aim of human life is pleasure, and he thinks pleasure can be divided into different types of desire. There's natural desire and vain desire. Now, of natural desire, there's necessary and unnecessary pleasures. The kind of pleasure that Epicurus is talking about is more of an absence of pain. It is a repose, a freedom from suffering. And he thought even intense emotional states were dangerous because they produced suffering. The perfect pleasure was a desire for repose, and it was a contemplative, quiet mode of being. Stoicism, on the other hand, had an idea of reality that was purposive and that there was a divinity involved in the reality. They were not materialists. What was important in Stoic wisdom was to make one's desires conform to a providential plan that there was for the universe. Now, you can see that here is a reliance upon almost a theism, and it's thought that if one contemplated long enough, it was possible to know the truths of the universe, and one could conform one's will to that of the larger universe. In the Stoic wisdom, it's possible to know all the virtues. Knowing one meant that you had knowledge of all the virtues. It was very similar to the Platonic notion of climbing out of the cave of ignorance and being in the full brightness of knowledge of goodness, so that you would have had to have known all the other virtues according to Plato in order to know the highest virtue of goodness. Well, the Stoics thought that if you understood one virtue, you must also understand them all. And it is possible to have perfection on earth if you lived according to the divine plan. There was a peak of wisdom. Interestingly enough, that if a person was not able to have a life free of suffering, the Stoics believed that suicide was okay. When harsh reality is so disturbing to one's inner equilibrium, it was okay to commit suicide. Now, the Christians and the Stoicism shared the idea of providential authority and a resignation to that, but the Christians disagreed with the Stoics on the idea of suicide. Suicide was not morally permitted. Carmenides was representative of a school of thought called the Skeptics, and they refused to accept any moral values as absolute. You might say that they are, descendants of the early sophists. Diogenes was a cynic, and he was like a wandering hermit who wandered through the streets of Athens looking for an honest man. So the story goes. And one day he saw someone drinking from a stream by cupping their hands, and he threw away his own cup, thinking, I can do that. I don't need these material objects. He thought that if you reduced your desires, that you would not have any suffering. The less desire you have, the less suffering you would have. He lived in a barrel. And another story goes that one day he and Alexander the Great had a meeting. Alexander the Great approached him where he was sitting and asked him some questions. And all that Diogenes replied was, could you please move? You're blocking the sunlight. And everyone looked aghast at the Diogenes' response to Alexander the Great, thinking, oh, what has he said now? Well, Alexander the Great burst out laughing. And he said, if I could not be myself, I would wish to be Diogenes. Now, what do you think this would mean? Here we have Alexander the Great, the most powerful person in that part of the world at that time, who said, I would like to be Diogenes if I couldn't be myself. Diogenes was free. He didn't have any wants. Alexander the Great was free. He had everything and didn't have any wants. So this is the connection. It is the idea of freedom.